We're a research group at the University of Southampton and focus on bringing together different geospatial demographic data sets to try and estimate and map population counts, characteristics, and mobility at small area scales, doing that quite often in collaboration with governments and UN agencies. And the aim is really to address some of these challenges that often exist with population data, where we may have data available, but it's at a coarse resolution, or that data that does exist can be outdated, incomplete, or inaccurate. And there's a huge amount of research and collaborations going on to try and address these issues, particularly directly with governments in situations where there may be conflict and data that has been not collected for a long time. And the way we try and address this is in the situation where we cannot go and collect new data, we cannot collect it every year, we can't go and count everybody, but what we can try and do is build up a picture of the landscape, of the types of things that relate to how populations distribute themselves on the landscape. So that can be maps of buildings, vegetation data, infrastructure. Often this looks more like this in terms of a stack of geospatial data sets that describe the landscape across the entire world. These can be from a range of sources. So we're kind of riding the waves of geospatial data science, AI that's enabling us now to map individual buildings, their heights and characteristics from satellite imagery, the range of volunteered geospatial data sources that give us information on infrastructure, place names, satellite images themselves that tell us something about images of the Earth at night, the brightness, as you can see on the top right there. And then there are often 20, 30, 40, sometimes 100 different geospatial data sets that cover things like topography, land cover, land use. And so a lot of our work is harmonizing, stitching these together, stacking them up to give a picture of the landscape. And this forms different ingredients into then trying to estimate populations at small area scales. We need some form of population data to anchor things to, and that can be small area samples or it can be in aggregate counts. We need some data on where settlements are, where humans are not. And then within those settlements, we need that stack of data to tell us how populations distribute themselves, their densities within those settlements. We develop often bespoke types of statistical models that try and bring these together, quantify those relationships, and ultimately produce estimates of population at grid square scales. This is really what we're producing. Approximately 100 by 100 meter, though in the case of these analysis, we're working at a 1 kilometer scale of estimates of population for each one of those grid squares. Obviously, the uncertainties are huge when we're estimating for an individual grid cell, but the value of these types of data is being able to aggregate to different types of units, whether it's administrative units, health units, enumeration areas, numbers of people within the boundaries of a settlement. And an example here in the case of what we're talking about today is being able to identify numbers of people within proximity of a certain feature or event. So the example here is health facilities, but what we're talking about is obviously conflict events. And just to visualize the process of one type of modeling that we're using here in these analysis, here's an area of northern Vietnam. Each one of these administrative units has a population count, but there can be somewhere around 500,000 or 1 million in many places. Very difficult then to be able to integrate with the location data from ACLED to identify how many people are exposed within a small area. What we do have is this stack of geospatial data sets. So we have information on buildings mapped from satellites to tell us likely the populations are within those grey or white areas. We don't know the densities, and this is where other layers can come in. We have things like land cover that can tell us something about population densities, things like images of the Earth at night. We then go from this aggregate counts, where sometimes we're having 1 million people in each one of those units. We're learning those statistical relationships with the stack of geospatial data sets at the finer spatial resolution using machine learning approaches. We're then using that stack to then disaggregate to the 100 by 100 meter grid squares. And so within the analysis we're presenting here today, we're making use of global data sets that we've produced that involve an assembly of age and sex structured subnational census data, official estimates, projections across the world. And we're right in the middle of a process at the moment of collecting millions more of these units from the 2020 round of censuses. This gives us aggregate counts across the entire world. We also collect and make use of household survey data in the areas where we don't have good age and sex structure data, and sometimes census microdata, often census data, that gives us those age and sex breakdowns for small subnational areas. We also then are gathering together these geospatial data sets across the time period. So just an example here from mapping settlements in Vietnam across the 20-year period to be able to capture some of those changes that have happened across the time periods we're looking at. This then produces these global data sets. So an estimate of number of people per each 100 by 100 meter grid square. You can access these in ArcGIS, in the UNFPA population data portal, and the health information systems used by many governments on HDX and Google Earth Engine. This is really what the data look like. You get for each grid square that age and sex structure. So just to finish off, there are many resources that you can go to explore those data sets, to do training yourself. And of course, this is an active research area, and we're continuing to update these data sets, particularly in some of those conflict-affected countries where conflict itself can result in changes of those populations. So integrating displacement data, for instance.